My husband, John, was making dinner when he got a text from a coworker. "Boss, I've missed you." After a moment's hesitation, I replied for him. "Come over. My wife's not home tonight." A short while later, the doorbell rang. My husband's face went as white as a sheet, completely drained of color. In the spacious kitchen of our luxury co-op on the Upper East Side, a sweet and savory aroma of slow-braised short ribs filled the air. It was the scent of a warm home, of the happy family life that so many people dream of. Or at least, that's what I had firmly believed until that very moment. John stood at the stove, stirring the pot that simmered over a low flame. He was wearing the navy blue apron I gave him for our wedding anniversary, while humming an old love song. Seen from behind, John was the perfect, successful man. A consummate professional who also knew how to take care of his family. He always told me that a man earning a living is an obligation, but cooking at home for his wife is a privilege. I was sitting at the kitchen island, flipping through an issue of Architectural Digest, but my mind was elsewhere. The warm yellow light illuminated the marble countertop, where John's latest generation iPhone lay silent. Its black screen was like an unfathomable abyss, hiding secrets that not even I, his wife, the person closest to him, had ever suspected. John turned with a radiant smile on his handsome face. The fine lines beginning to form around his eyes only added to his charm. He asked me to taste the stew to see if it needed more salt, then went back to focusing on the complex seasonings. It was right then. The phone screen on the countertop suddenly lit up, soundlessly, but with a cold blue flash indicating the arrival of an iMessage. My gaze instinctively shot toward it. The sentence that appeared on the lock screen was short, but it was enough to shatter the peaceful world I had worked so hard to build. Sender: Chloe, intern. Content: Boss, I've missed you. Just 4 words. My heart no longer ached. That pain had died a week earlier when I held the bank statement in my hands. All I had left now was a profound contempt and a meticulously crafted plan. Chloe. I knew that name. She was the new intern who had joined John's department a few months ago. I remember John once mentioning her, praising her for being quick, polite, and eager to learn. What I hadn't imagined was that her eagerness to learn would extend to her boss's husband. I took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. The rationality of a woman in her 30s who had overcome countless difficulties to get where she was didn't allow me to scream or break things. If I made a scene, John would just invent some excuse, saying it was a joke from an immature girl. I needed something more. I needed irrefutable proof, evidence they couldn't deny. John was still chopping vegetables. The rhythmic sound of the knife against the cutting board drowned out the wild beating of my heart. Silently, I picked up the phone. The passcode to unlock it was our wedding anniversary. How ironic. He used the most important day of our lives as a shield for his dirty secrets. I typed in the familiar 6 digits. The screen unlocked, showing the iMessage conversation with the unread message at the top. Without reading it, I quickly typed a reply. My fingers, cold and precise, slid across the virtual keyboard. Come over. My wife's not home tonight. I hit send. I watched as the little blue read notification appeared, and a faint smile touched my lips. I took a screenshot of that brief conversation, sent it to my own phone, and then erased every trace from John's phone. I wanted him to be completely oblivious when the show began. I placed the iPhone back on the counter, at the exact same angle it had been. My hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the repressed anger simmering deep within me. I looked at John's back. He was still the same man, with the same devoted appearance. But now, in my eyes, it was all disgusting hypocrisy. He was playing the part of the perfect husband, but his mind was probably flying to his young, pretty lover. If he wanted to act in this farce so badly, I would make sure I directed the tragic final scene myself. I fixed my hair, recomposed my expression, and tried to return to my usual state of calm. The storm inside me was hidden behind a serene gaze, waiting for the chance to unleash its devastation. This was going to be a very long night. John served the steaming short ribs on a large platter and placed it in the center of the dining table. The intense aroma of herbs and beef filled the dining room. With a cloth, he meticulously wiped away the smallest spatter from the edge of the dish. Yesterday, that delicate gesture would have moved me enough to hug him. Today, however, looking at that stew was like gazing at sugar-coated poison. He served me a plate of white rice and, taking the most appetizing piece of meat, placed it on top. In a warm, deep voice, he said, "Eat while it's hot. I cooked the meat until it falls apart in your mouth." He even boasted about going to 3 different markets to find the best cut of short ribs, just to take care of me as I deserved. I accepted the plate from my husband, making a superhuman effort to keep my hands from shaking. I put a piece of meat in my mouth and chewed it slowly. It was incredibly tender, and the sauce was just the way I liked it. But as I swallowed, I tasted a bitter, nauseating flavor, as if I were chewing ash. I had to take a large sip of water to keep from gagging. I looked at the man sitting across from me. John ate with gusto, occasionally offering me a side dish and telling me amusing stories from work. He talked about a new project, how the CEO had congratulated him, and his promotion plans for the year. But there was not a single mention of the name Chloe or that young intern. I wondered how a person could lead a double life with such mastery, able to receive an "I've missed you" from his lover, and moments later play the role of the exemplary husband who adores his wife. Perhaps during our 6 years of marriage, he had repeated this performance so many times that even I could no longer distinguish what was real and what was fake. I remembered our difficult beginnings when we got married. We started with nothing in a small studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. John took my hand and swore he would work tirelessly so I would never want for anything to get us a decent home. And he kept his promise. This luxury co-op, all these comforts, were a testament to our joint effort. But it seems that, as material abundance grew, people's hearts began to change too. Satiety gave way to base desires, and the devoted wife who once shared a simple sandwich with him now seemed bland compared to the young, fresh women outside. Pretending to be full, I put down my silverware. I said I was a little tired and didn't have much of an appetite. John immediately put on a concerned expression. He stood up, came over to me, and placed his hand on my forehead to check for a fever. His hand was warm, but as soon as it touched my skin, I felt a cold that chilled me to the bone. I turned my head slightly to avoid his hypocritical touch, excusing myself to get a glass of water. I glanced at the wall clock. The short hand was approaching 7, and the long hand was on the 12. Time passed with a mocking slowness. From her office or her student apartment, it would take her between 30 and 45 minutes to get here. I wasn't going to let this golden opportunity pass. My wife's not home tonight. That spell was more powerful than any invitation. When I returned to the table, John was clearing the plates. He told me to go rest in the living room, that he would handle the dishes. The image of my husband rolling up his sleeves to wash dishes, something I used to boast about to my friends, now seemed like just another scene in his repugnant play. I sat on the sofa and picked up the TV remote, but didn't turn it on. My gaze was fixed on the front door, and my ears were alert to any sound from the hallway. A fierce battle was raging in my mind. One part of me wished she wouldn't come, that it had all been a bad joke so I could continue deceiving myself. But the other half, the colder, crueler half, longed for the doorbell to ring as soon as possible. I wanted this pain to come out into the open in all its rawness, because an abscess only heals when it bursts, even if the scar it leaves is forever. Each minute passed with infinite heaviness. The sound of running water from the kitchen stopped. John came out, drying his hands with a towel, and asked if I wanted some fruit for dessert. I shook my head and managed a slight smile. It was probably a crooked, forced smile, but John didn't notice. He was too confident in his own perfection, or perhaps he had never cared enough about my mood to notice anything strange in my eyes. The clock struck exactly 8 p.m. The apartment was so quiet you could hear the ticking of the second hand. John sat on the sofa opposite me and started reading the news on his phone with an expression of complete tranquility. He probably thought it would be another peaceful evening with his wife, or maybe he was already planning what message he would send his lover as soon as I fell asleep. He had no idea that the storm was about to break right on his doorstep. Ding-dong. The sound of the doorbell shattered the silence. It wasn't loud, but in that space, it echoed like the starting gun of a war. John looked up, startled. His eyes showed surprise mixed with a hint of confusion. He looked at the clock, then at the door, and muttered, "Who could that be at this hour?" Then he looked at me, as if I had the answer. I remained motionless on the sofa, maintaining an almost icy composure. "Stay seated," I said. "I'll get it." My voice was soft but firm, leaving him no room to move. I stood up and walked slowly toward the door. Each step on the hardwood floor sounded heavy, like the hammer blows driving the final nails into a coffin. My heart pounded, not with fear, but with the strange excitement of a hunter about to trap her prey. I took a deep breath, straightened my posture, and put my hand on the doorknob. I turned the lock and opened the heavy wooden door. In front of me stood a young, petite woman, well made up, but with a face that still had a girlish air. She wore a tight-fitting dress that highlighted her young figure, and in her hands she held a small, carefully packaged box with a single cupcake. The moment she saw me, the flirtatious smile on her lips vanished, replaced by an expression of pure panic. Her eyes widened, her pupils contracted in fear, and her face, once flushed, turned pale as paper. She froze, her trembling hands almost dropping the cupcake box. She had expected John to open the door. She must have imagined the scene, jumping into his arms, telling him in a syrupy voice how much she had missed him. But the harsh reality that hit her was the image of me, the lady of the house, his lawful wife, blocking the entrance with a gaze as sharp as a knife. I said nothing at first, just silently observed her terrified expression. My silence made the atmosphere even more suffocating. Chloe took half a step back, her lips moving as if she wanted to say something, but her throat seemed blocked, as if someone were strangling her. She looked inside the apartment, and then back at me, with the expression of a thief caught in the act. I heard John's footsteps behind me. "Who is it, honey? What's taking so long?" he asked. His voice threw Chloe into even greater confusion. She looked around as if searching for an escape route. But I wasn't going to let my prey get away so easily. I smiled. It was probably a smile more terrifying than tears, and then I spoke. My voice was loud and clear enough for both the person inside and the one outside to hear, loaded with a cold authority. "Hello, Chloe. Are you here to see my husband?" My question was like a bucket of cold water for Chloe and, at the same time, a shock for the approaching John. I saw Chloe flinch. She realized she had fallen into a trap, but there was no turning back. The door was open. The show had officially begun. Chloe cowered like a baby bird that had mistakenly fallen into an eagle's nest. She clutched the cupcake box so tightly, her knuckles turned white. Stammering, she barely managed to articulate a few words to justify her inopportune appearance at this hour. She said she had heard John was sick and, since she was passing by, she had decided to bring him a cupcake, hoping he would get well soon so he could continue teaching her, the intern. It was a lie so clumsy it was pathetic. I knew perfectly well that John wasn't sick, and that our building was so out of the way it was impossible to be just passing by. But I didn't correct her. The fun of the cat and mouse game is not to kill the mouse immediately, but to play with it until it's exhausted from pure terror. Maintaining a slight smile, I fixed my gaze on her face, which was changing colors by the second. Seeing Chloe try to turn and flee, I said in a voice as cold as ice, "If you take a single step out of this hallway, tomorrow the entire company and your parents back home will receive the photos and messages between you two. Come in and let's talk calmly, and I'll let you keep a shred of dignity." Chloe froze in place. Trembling, she reluctantly followed me inside. I told her that since she was here, she could take the opportunity to see the apartment, that the atmosphere was very cozy. I made a point of saying I wanted to formally introduce her to my husband. I deliberately drew out the word husband, as if I were stamping a seal of ownership on the man who stood frozen behind me. John had already reached the living room. Seeing me walk in with Chloe, his face contorted even more than hers. His eyes were wide and his mouth was open, but he couldn't say a word. The phone he was holding fell onto the sofa. He looked back and forth between Chloe and me, oscillating violently between panic and confusion. He couldn't understand why Chloe was there or why I was receiving her so calmly. I led Chloe to the center of the living room and sat her on the armchair, across from the large sofa where John usually sat. Chloe perched on the edge, her back straight and knees together, not daring to look up. I turned to John and motioned for him to sit next to me. Like a soulless automaton, John staggered to the sofa. Despite the air conditioning being set to 75 degrees, beads of sweat dotted his forehead. He sat as far away from me as possible, as if I were a bomb about to explode. I began the introductions. Pointing to Chloe, I told John that she was that good intern he talked so much about, who had come to visit him in the middle of the night with a cupcake and everything upon hearing her boss was sick. Then I introduced John to Chloe, saying he was the most exemplary husband in the world, a man who had never disappointed me. Each of my compliments was like a needle piercing John's skin. I saw him shrink. I noticed Chloe cast a pleading look at John. She must have been hoping for a word from him, an excuse, a reassuring gesture to save her from this situation. But all she received was a cowardly evasion. John kept his head down, fidgeting with the hem of his shirt, not daring to utter a word. His cowardice only increased my contempt, and probably even Chloe began to feel a pang of disappointment. The man who seemed so admirable and authoritative at the office had, upon being discovered in his infidelity, turned into a pathetic little man who feared his wife more than a lion. I stood up, saying I was going to offer our guests something to drink. I asked Chloe what she would like, orange juice, water, or a hot tea. In a barely audible voice, she replied that water would be fine. I smiled and went to the kitchen. The living room fell into a deathly silence. I knew that as soon as I was gone, those two would exchange panicked glances, but they wouldn't dare speak for fear I might hear them. And that's exactly what I wanted, to let the terror slowly eat away at their minds. In the kitchen, I made noise on purpose, taking out glasses and plates so they would know I was still nearby, listening. I opened the glass cabinet and walked past the expensive crystal we used for important guests. My hand stopped on a package of thin, disposable plastic cups, the kind used for outdoor parties or at street food stalls. I took one of those cups and filled it with water from the dispenser. The choice was not random. I wanted to belittle Chloe through the smallest detail. I wanted her to understand that her place in this house, in our life, was as cheap and temporary as that cup. An object to be used and thrown away, not worth keeping. I returned to the living room with a tray and placed the plastic cup of water in front of Chloe. For John and myself, however, I served tea in elegant fine china cups with a gold rim. The stark contrast between the two types of vessels was obvious on the glass coffee table. Chloe looked at the plastic cup, which clashed with the luxurious table, and her face turned a deep red with humiliation. She had understood the message. It was an insult without words, but deeper and sharper than any curse. I sat down next to John, this time deliberately pressing against him. I took his arm and rested my head on his shoulder in an affectionate gesture. John went stiff as a wooden doll, his muscles tense. Through his thin shirt, I could feel the frantic beating of his heart. Cold sweat continued to slide down his temples. I started the conversation with hypocritically social questions. I asked Chloe how her internship was going, if John was very demanding, if he didn't harass the interns. As I spoke, I stroked John's arm and gave him loving glances from time to time. Chloe answered in monosyllables, not daring to look directly at the tender scene unfolding before her. Her eyes held a mixture of envy, bitterness, and fear. She was witnessing how the man she coveted belonged legally and completely to another woman. The sweet promises John might have whispered to her when they were alone became insignificant in the face of this crushing reality. The air in the room was so thick it was hard to breathe. Not even the soft hum of the air conditioner could dispel the suffocating atmosphere. I felt like I was watching a tragic silent play where each actor struggled to play their part, with the difference that only I had the script and knew the ending. Suddenly, I changed the subject and turned to John with an excited voice. I brought up our vacation plans to Hawaii for the following month. I enthusiastically described an idyllic future, the blue sea, the white sand, romantic candlelit dinners. I added that we were looking at a country house in the Hamptons to spend weekends gardening and fishing, and that we were already planning how to take care of our parents in their old age. Every one of my words was a dagger in Chloe's heart. She would realize she was completely excluded from John's life, the future plans, the assets, the long-term projects. All of that belonged to us as a couple. There was no room for her in that picture. She was just a passing whim, a temporary pleasure for John. John sat in deathly silence, neither confirming nor denying anything. He looked like he was sitting on hot coals, wishing for this psychological torture to end as soon as possible. But I wasn't going to let him off that easily. I wanted to burn this horrible night into both of their memories, so they would feel a shiver every time they remembered it. I turned to Chloe and, with a smile, asked a seemingly innocent but loaded question. "Chloe, being so young and beautiful, you must have so many men chasing you. I, on the other hand, am getting older. I have to hold on to this man so he doesn't slip away. I'm afraid someone will steal him from me if I'm not careful. They say there are a lot of cunning little homewreckers nowadays, popping up like mushrooms after the rain, right?" Chloe flinched and ducked her head sharply. She clenched her fists so tightly the tips of her fingers turned white. She knew exactly who I was referring to. The word homewreckers, though spoken lightly, was sharp as a razor and severed the last shred of her pride. The word hung in the air, making the atmosphere even more uncomfortable. Chloe didn't dare answer my question. She mumbled something unintelligible and avoided my inquisitive gaze. I could see her fragile shoulders trembling violently, despite her efforts to control herself. The confidence and flirtatiousness with which she had arrived at my home had completely vanished, leaving only the image of a sinner awaiting judgment. But I wasn't going to let them escape so easily. I turned to John and squeezed his arm a little tighter. My nails dug slightly into his skin through his shirt, reminding him of my powerful presence. I looked at my husband and, changing my voice to a syrupy tone but keeping a gaze as sharp as a knife, I asked him about the country house in the Hamptons we had gone to see last week. I spoke loudly and clearly, making sure Chloe heard everything. I reminded him that our parents had loved the property, that it had good feng shui, and that being near the water, it was very cool. I emphasized that my parents had promised to contribute $150,000 for the renovation as a gift for their future grandchildren. At the mention of children, I felt John's body tense up. It was his weakest point. We had been married for 6 years but had postponed having children until we achieved financial stability. And now, when everything was ready, I discovered this betrayal. But I brought up the topic of children on purpose. I knew it was the strongest anchor, the family and social legitimacy that a temporary mistress like Chloe could never provide. I enthusiastically described a happy family, full of children's laughter. I said that next year was perfect to try for a child, that at our age it was the ideal time, and that I hoped it would be a boy. Then I turned to Chloe and asked her if she didn't think that was a wonderful plan. At the direct question, Chloe startled, and the small spoon she was holding fell from her hands. The clink of metal against the plate sounded sharp in the silence. She hurried to pick it up and, with a flushed face, stammered, It's a great plan. I'm sure you'll be very happy." How ironic that forced blessing sounded from the lips of a rival. I knew that inside she was screaming, consumed by envy. She had come here hoping to carve out a place in our life, but all she had found was a firm declaration of a future in which there was no room for her. The large estate, the strong family ties, the long-term plans, all of it formed an impregnable wall protecting this marriage. A wall that someone like her, with nothing to offer, could never tear down. I continued my psychological attack on the financial front. I said to John, "Tomorrow I'll make the transfer for the down payment on the house, so sign the title change papers quickly." I deliberately emphasized that the house would be in both of our names. It was a declaration of sovereignty over our assets. A warning that everything John had was tied to me, and that if he left me, he would lose everything. John, sweating profusely, nodded his head. He wished I would shut up, that I would stop torturing him with these sweet words about the future, which sounded more terrifying than a threat at knife point. He knew perfectly well the warning hidden behind each of my words. Don't be an idiot and trade everything you have for a fleeting pleasure. The conversation about the house and children seemed to suck the last drop of vitality out of Chloe. She shrank on the armchair, clutching the cup of water with both hands, as if seeking a warmth that had long since vanished. I looked back and forth between the thin plastic cup in her hands and the gold-rimmed cup in mine, feeling a cruel pleasure. I lifted my cup, took a sip, and savored the subtle aroma of the high-quality green tea. I commented on how delicious the tea was, its clear and smooth flavor. I offered Chloe a drink too, but my gaze lingered on her cheap plastic cup with false compassion. "Chloe, are you okay with just water? Would you like me to make you some orange juice? Water is a bit plain, don't you think?" My voice was kind, like that of a charitable lady giving alms to a beggar, but with an undertone of contempt. Chloe hastily shook her hands. No, I'm fine. I was thirsty. Water is enough. I don't want to be a bother." The word bother she used seemed ridiculous to me. Her mere presence here at this hour was the biggest bother of all. I set my cup on the table. The sharp, firm sound of china against glass echoed in the living room. I looked at John. He was still sitting like a dead man, his eyes fixed on the tips of his shoes. I decided to involve him more in this fun game. I told him to peel some apples for our guest. A man of the house should be a gentleman. How can you have a guest sitting here without attending to her? John, as if he'd received an electric shock, jumped up and went to the kitchen for apples and a knife. He peeled the fruit clumsily, his hands trembling, leaving the skin uneven and in chunks. The man who once made me flowers out of carrots was now unable to peel a simple apple in front of his mistress. His mind had short-circuited. Fear had paralyzed all his senses and abilities. When he placed the plate of apples on the table, I speared the most appetizing piece with a fork and brought it directly to John's mouth. "Open up. I'll feed you. Don't touch it with your hands. They're dirty." John hesitated for a moment but finally accepted the apple I offered him. The scene of a couple lovingly feeding each other in front of a third person was both natural and extremely provocative. I pushed the plate of apples toward Chloe. "You have some too, Chloe. They're imported, very crisp and sweet." Chloe looked at the piece of apple John had just eaten and then at the plate in front of her, as if a lump had formed in her throat. How could she possibly swallow a bite while witnessing such a display of affection? The discriminatory treatment wasn't limited to the cups, but also to the attention and care. I was the wife. I had the right to publicly care for my husband and be cared for by him. She, on the other hand, no matter how much John might want her on the outside, was an intruder in here, a forced spectator to the show of our marital happiness. I saw Chloe's eyes turn red. She was probably crying on the inside, or perhaps regretting the foolishness of coming here only to be humiliated like this. But I didn't feel a shred of compassion. My compassion died the moment I saw the "I've missed you" message on the phone screen. Mercy is a luxury I do not grant to those who try to destroy another's home. Silence once again took over the living room, but this time the air smelled much more of gunpowder. Chloe, perhaps to break the tension or to try to salvage some of her image as a considerate person in front of John, cleared her throat and timidly asked about his health. "Boss, how's your stomach? Is it hurting less?" Her voice was low but tinged with sincere concern. She even offered to ask her mother to send a honey and black garlic concoction from her hometown, which she claimed was very good for the stomach. Hearing that, John's face turned livid. He hastily shook his hands, saying he was fine, that it wasn't necessary. He glanced at me, terrified, knowing his stupid mistress had just made a fatal mistake. She was demonstrating a knowledge of her boss's private life that far exceeded the bounds of a normal professional relationship. I let out a laugh, a short, icy laugh that made them both shudder. I looked at Chloe with a penetrating gaze, as if I could read her soul. "Wow, Chloe, you really care about your boss. Imagine that. The wife who lives and sleeps with him in the same bed still hasn't prepared that honey and black garlic for him. But you, an intern who's only been here a few months, how do you know so much about his ailments?" I deliberately drew out the words, "lives and sleeps with him in the same bed," to remind Chloe of her place. I gave her no quarter and continued my attack. "Does John complain about his pains at the office in front of you, or do you two see each other alone so often that you know the details of his diet?" Chloe was speechless. Her face went from red to purple. She stammered that she had simply seen him at the office touching his stomach with a pained expression and had asked out of pure guesswork. A pathetic excuse. I knew John's stomach problems were chronic. To avoid damaging his image as a strong leader, he rarely showed signs of weakness in public. He only did so when he was alone with someone he trusted. I shot John a withering glare. And you? Why are you worrying your employees at work? Next time, if you feel unwell, you tell me. Your wife. Don't make other people worry and bring you medicine. They'll think your wife doesn't take care of you. The other day you told me you were late because of a client dinner and your stomach hurt. Now I see what kind of client dinner it was. At my insinuation, John lowered his head and said nothing. He knew perfectly well what I was referring to. The night he used the excuse of a work dinner, he had actually had dinner with Chloe and had probably complained about his ailments to win the young woman's sympathy. I had just exposed the hypocrisy of a coworker's concern and laid bare the raw truth of their ambiguous relationship. Her excessive interest was proof that she had crossed the line, and I, as his wife, had every right to question and unmask that hypocrisy here in my own home. The wall clock struck 9. The cat-and-mouse game had reached its climax. I felt it was time to deliver the final blow, a blow that would completely destroy the intruder's morale and serve as a final warning to my treacherous husband. I slowly took my phone out of my pocket and placed it on the table. I swiped my finger across the screen, pretending to check a message, and then sighed on purpose. The world is so complicated these days. The news is full of nothing but infidelity and scandals. My friends tell me that young girls now are so shameless. They send messages to other women's husbands as if they were their boyfriends, without the slightest bit of shame. I paused and observed their reactions. Chloe remained motionless, but her breathing had quickened. John was discreetly wiping sweat from his forehead with a handkerchief. The tension was like a guitar string about to snap. I sharpened my voice even more and continued. I also tend to look at John's phone to help him with work things, and lately I've seen a lot of messages coming in from unknown numbers. A young girl, it seems. Her name sounds very innocent. Must be an intern. She sends very affectionate messages to John. I glanced at Chloe. All the color had drained from her face. Her lips, once painted a deep red, were now white and trembling. With a mocking smile, I delivered the final blow. You know what, Chloe? The other day I was home and my husband was making dinner, and suddenly a girl sends a message to his phone saying, "I miss you." What nerve, don't you think? With his wife at home, to dare send a message like that. Was she trying to challenge me? My words fell like a lightning bolt on Chloe. She stared at me with wide eyes, terror etched in her pupils. She understood everything. The "I miss you" message from a little while ago. The reply, "Come over. My wife's not home tonight." It had all been a trap, a perfect trap that I had set myself, and she, like a stupid moth, had flown right into it. Chloe's hands and feet began to tremble uncontrollably. She looked at me as if she were seeing a monster. She realized that the woman sitting across from her was not a docile, naive housewife, but a master of psychological warfare. I had known everything from the beginning, but I had acted completely naturally, inviting her in, serving her water, offering her a cupcake, and then I had stripped away her mask layer by layer until she was left completely naked in her own shame. John, beside me, was also in shock. He turned to me with a look of pure horror. He would have never imagined that I had read that message and that I was twisted enough to lure Chloe here and humiliate her in this way. My intelligence and my cruelty sent a shiver down his spine. He realized he had greatly underestimated his wife. I looked Chloe directly in the eyes. My gaze was cold and contemptuous. I didn't need to say anything more. My silence was the most severe of sentences. I had revealed everything, but I still hadn't spoken her name directly. I wanted to see if she had a shred of dignity left to retreat on her own. It was the last act of mercy I would grant her before she left this house. Chloe couldn't take it anymore. The invisible pressure emanating from me, John's cowardice, and the cruel truth that had just been revealed crushed her will. Every second must have been torture for her, as if she were sitting in an electric chair. She hastily grabbed the purse she had left beside her. In her rush, the purse hit the chair with a dull thud. She jumped up, but her legs gave out and she nearly fell. Without daring to look me in the face, head bowed, she mumbled that she had to leave. She made the excuse that something urgent had come up at home, that her mother had told her to come back right away, and that she was sorry she couldn't stay longer. Her voice was broken, on the verge of tears. Without waiting for our response, she ran to the door like a hunted thief. The cupcake box was left abandoned on the table, a testament to the miserable failure of her visit. John made a move to get up, probably to walk her out or apologize, but I was faster. I placed my hand on his thigh and squeezed hard, signaling him to stay put. My glare warned him not to do anything stupid in this situation. John understood my message and froze, his eyes following Chloe's back as she disappeared through the door. I stood up and followed her slowly to the entryway. I walked calmly and confidently, in stark contrast to her nervousness. Chloe was trying to put on her shoes, but her hands were shaking so much she couldn't manage it. I leaned against the doorframe with my arms crossed, watching her with a mixture of pity and contempt. When she finally managed to get her shoes on, and was about to open the door to the hallway, I called her name. Chloe. She stopped short, startled. She turned around with a frightened, pleading look. She probably feared I would make a scene in the building's hallway, that I would insult her or grab her by the hair, but I didn't. My dignity wouldn't allow me to behave like that. I approached her and whispered in her ear, low enough for only the two of us to hear. My voice was as soft as a breeze, but as cold as ancient ice. Next time you come to see my husband, call ahead. If you're wandering around at this time of night, the neighbors might get the wrong idea and think something strange is happening in this respectable home. And remember this, John's wife isn't always out of the house. Upon hearing my words, every last drop of blood drained from Chloe's face. She nodded her head repeatedly, like a pecking chicken. She stammered a yes and ran toward the elevator, frantically pressing the button as if to escape as quickly as possible. Her small, lonely, and pathetic figure was silhouetted against the bright light of the hallway. I watched until the elevator doors closed, swallowing her whole. A faint smile played on my lips. One down. The young prey had gotten a good scare. Now, she wouldn't dare come near my husband, even if she were paid to. But the war wasn't over. The main enemy, the one who had caused me the deepest wound, was still sitting in the living room. I turned and slammed the door shut. The sharp click of the lock echoed through the apartment. It announced the beginning of the judgment for the treacherous husband. I took a deep breath, regained my cold expression, and walked back in. The wooden door closed, completely isolating this apartment, now thick with a deadly air, from the outside world. The victorious smile that had been on my lips vanished like a candle in the wind. I didn't go straight back to the living room. I stood for a few seconds, gripping the cold doorknob. The waves of nausea rising from my stomach were unbearable. I had delivered a brilliant performance, but the price was a deep wound bleeding in my heart. I turned and slowly entered the living room. John was still in the same spot, motionless on the cream-colored leather sofa. His head was bowed, his hands clasped over his knees. He looked pathetic, a far cry from the sophisticated, self-assured husband he used to be. But his misery didn't inspire the slightest compassion in me. On the contrary, it only deepened my contempt. I walked over to him, picked up his iPhone, which lay abandoned on the coffee table, looked at him, then at the phone, and suddenly, with a swift motion, I smashed it hard against the glass tabletop. Crack. The sharp, violent sound broke the suffocating silence. The phone's screen shattered, cracks spreading like a spider web, a perfect reflection of our marriage at that moment. John jumped, looking at me with a face pale with terror. I crossed my arms and looked down at him with an icy glare. In a sharp, firm voice, devoid of all emotion, I said, "Explain yourself." The message, "Come over. My wife's not home tonight." I sent that. Did you think I was an idiot who didn't know what was going on? John's jaw dropped, and he stared at me in disbelief. He didn't expect me to show my cards so quickly and so forcefully. Perhaps he thought I only had vague suspicions, but he never imagined that I had been in control of everything from the start. His lips trembled as he tried to articulate a pathetic excuse. "Honey, it's a misunderstanding. She and I are just co-workers. Her coming here tonight was a total surprise to me. I swear, I didn't know anything. He tried to play the victim. His eyes avoided my gaze. I let out a bitter laugh. Co-workers. A co-worker sends you a message at 8 p.m. saying she misses you. A co-worker knows your eating habits and your health issues better than your own wife. A co-worker dares to come to your house thinking your wife isn't home. I moved closer to him, looking him directly in the face, and said, enunciating every syllable, "Don't take me for a fool. We've lived together for 6 years. I know you better than you know yourself." That furtive glance, that shock when the doorbell rang, that cowardly attitude in front of your mistress, it all gave you away. John lowered his head, not daring to reply. He knew that in the face of such obvious truth, any lie was useless. His silence was the clearest of confessions. I felt an immense disappointment. The man I had loved and trusted blindly was nothing more than a dirty liar, a coward incapable of taking responsibility for his actions. John's silence added fuel to the fire of my anger. I didn't need his empty apologies. I wanted him to face the raw truth he had tried so hard to hide. I went to my purse, which was on a cabinet, and pulled out a stack of papers I had prepared that afternoon. It was the evidence I had been secretly gathering for the past week, ever since my suspicions began. I threw the papers in his face. The white sheets flew and landed in a messy pile on the shattered phone. John picked up a paper. His hands trembled violently. It was a bank statement detailing the last 3 months. I had circled in red the transfers made to a Chloe Miller with ambiguous descriptions like gift or meal. The amounts weren't huge, a few $100s each time, but the frequency was suspiciously high. One transfer of $1,500 from last week stood out, with the note, "Happy birthday." I pointed to the statement and raised my voice. "And how do you explain this money? A $1,500 birthday gift for an intern. For my birthday, a bouquet of flowers and a simple dinner were enough. Your generosity is truly admirable." John was speechless, sweating profusely. He hadn't expected me to know his finances in such detail, but that wasn't all. I pulled out the screenshots of his iMessage conversations that I had taken from his tablet, where he had forgotten to log out. Flirtatious messages, plans for lunch and movies, and even expressions of cloying, disgusting longing. I threw down another piece of evidence. It was a movie ticket stub from 2 weeks ago for an 11 p.m., showing, that day he told me he was late because of a client dinner, but he was actually watching a movie with his mistress. And finally, I produced a photo of a long, color-treated brown hair found on the passenger seat of his car. My hair was black and short. That hair was, without a doubt, Chloe's. Faced with such irrefutable proof, John completely fell apart. There was no way to deny it or make excuses anymore. His mask of hypocritical morality had been ripped off, revealing his true nature as a traitor. He let his arms fall to his sides and sank into the sofa with an expression of despair, and then he began to cry. A man's tears, something I had rarely seen. "I'm sorry. I lost my mind for a moment. She bewitched me. Please forgive me, just this once." A late apology and a cowardly excuse, blaming someone else. Cheating men always use the same script. I gave in to temptation. I couldn't help it. Seeing him cry chilled my heart. I went to the kitchen. I picked up the pot with the slow-braised short ribs that he had so lovingly prepared all afternoon. Before John's astonished eyes, I dumped the entire contents into the trash can in the corner. The delicious aroma of the stew mixed with the sour smell of garbage, creating a nauseating stench. I turned to John and delivered my final line. "My love for you is like this stew. It was once delicious and precious, but once it's tainted, it's just garbage. And I don't eat garbage." My act of throwing out the stew was like a bucket of cold water for John, who seemed to snap out of his delusion. He realized I wasn't joking. The determination in my eyes and actions heralded an irrevocable break. John ran to me, knelt, and hugged my legs. He wept uncontrollably, begging me not to leave him, not to divorce him. He swore he would break things off with Chloe, that he would even quit his job if necessary, that he would do anything to fix his mistake. He appealed to our parents, to our 6 years of marriage, trying to hold me back. I remained as rigid as a stone, letting him cry while clinging to my legs. My heart was already dead. His current vows only disgusted me more. If he had truly valued our 6 years of love, he wouldn't have slept with another woman. If he had truly thought of our parents, he wouldn't have let things get to this point. Coldly, I pushed his hands away and stepped back. I looked at him with pity and said, "Keep what little dignity you have left. Don't be any more pathetic. My decision is final." I turned and went straight to the bedroom. Hidden inside the closet was the large suitcase I had packed that afternoon. I pulled it out and added some more clothes and my essential personal items. I didn't take much, only what was truly mine. This house, this furniture, now seemed stained by betrayal. I came out into the living room with the suitcase. John was still on the floor, sobbing with his head down. His cries echoed in the silent space. I left a sheet of paper I had printed earlier on the table. It was the promissory note for the $40,000 my parents had loaned us at the beginning of our marriage when we couldn't afford the apartment renovation, along with the receipts in my father's name. This $40,000 is a clear debt. Don't even think about not paying it. When you sell the apartment, the first thing will be to settle this debt, and then we'll split the rest, I told John in a frigid voice. Get ready to pay back every last cent. The apartment is in both our names, but I'm not going to fight for it. You can have it to live with your mistress, but you have to give me back my parents' money. John looked at the papers and then at me. His expression was one of pure desperation. He knew he couldn't come up with that much money overnight, but I didn't care. It was the price he had to pay for his betrayal. I wanted him to feel the pain of loss to his core, both emotionally and materially. I dragged the suitcase toward the door. Before leaving, I took one last look at the apartment. What was once our home had now become the tomb of my love. I opened the door and stepped out into the hallway. The sound of the door closing behind me resonated once more, putting an end to 6 years of my youth with that shameless man. Without looking back, I walked with a steady pace toward the elevator. A new life awaited me. It would be difficult, but at least it would be clean and peaceful. The taxi sped through the empty streets of the city at night. Sitting in the back seat, I watched the streetlights flash by. My mind was blank, but strangely light. I didn't cry. The tears seemed to have dried up inside, crystallized into a sharp determination. I was heading to Sophia's apartment, my best friend since college. Sophia was a prestigious lawyer in the city, specializing in divorces and asset disputes. She was strong, decisive, and extremely intelligent. I had given her a heads up, so she was already waiting for me at the entrance when I arrived. Seeing me get out of the car with a haggard face, dragging a suitcase, Sophia didn't ask any questions. She approached silently and gave me a tight hug. At that warm gesture of friendship, I almost broke down in tears, but I held back. It was not the time to show weakness. Sophia took me to her apartment. It was a small but cozy place, filled with the pleasant scent of lemongrass essential oil. She offered me a glass of hot water and told me to sit down and tell her everything, and so I did. I told her everything, from the fateful message to the drama I staged to invite Chloe over, the confrontation with John, and my decision to leave. I spoke with surprising calmness, as if I were telling someone else's story. When I finished, Sophia slammed her hand on the table. She let out a curse and told me I had done the right thing, that a cheating man is unforgivable, and that my way of handling the mistress had been next-level civilized, yet at the same time, extremely cruel. Sophia began to analyze the situation from a legal perspective. She reviewed the evidence I had gathered, the bank statements, the messages, the photos. She nodded and said that I had more than enough to win in court. She offered to take my case if John didn't agree to an amicable divorce, but Sophia told me that before going to court, we should teach that perfect couple a lesson they would never forget. The divorce was my liberation, but true justice was punishing the traitor. She proposed a more subtle plan of revenge. Instead of making a scene or exposing him on social media to become city gossip, we would attack what mattered most to John, his career and his reputation. Sophia instructed me to organize all the evidence into a single file. She said she would help me draft a formal complaint to send to the management of John's company, a fatal blow to his finances and his credibility. It would be 1,000 times more painful than a couple of slaps. I nodded. Okay. Our eyes met, and in them, a shared determination shone. That night would be the night we planned the final battle. The 2 days of the weekend passed in a terrifying silence. John kept calling and sending messages, but I didn't answer. I turned off my phone and spent all my time at Sophia's, preparing the special gift for my husband and his mistress. Sophia helped me draft the email. Instead of insults or slander, we used professional, objective, and sharp language, as if it were a formal indictment. The subject line was short but powerful. Report on violation of internal code of conduct and inappropriate relationship between team lead and intern. I scanned all the evidence. The iMessage screenshots with the risque conversations, the bank statements proving the use of his salary for gifts and unauthorized expenses, the photo of the movie tickets during work hours as proof of professional negligence. Sophia organized everything into a single PDF file over 10 megabytes, clearly noting dates, times, and places. On Monday morning, the sky was gray, as if foreshadowing a storm. At 9 a.m., sharp, the time when all office workers sit at their desks and start checking their email, I turned on the computer. Sophia, sitting next to me, put a hand on my shoulder in a sign of support. I took a deep breath and reviewed the draft one last time. The recipient list included the CEO, the head of human resources, and the heads of the relevant departments. I didn't send it to the entire company. I didn't want to become a cheap gossip. I only sent it to the people with the power to decide John and Chloe's fate. The mouse cursor hovered over the send button. My heart pounded, not from fear, but from the tension of the decisive moment. A single click would completely change the lives of 3 people. John would lose the career he had built over 10 years. Chloe would lose the future that was just beginning to blossom, and I would put an end to a painful past to start a new chapter. I remembered Chloe's shameless look when she arrived at my house. I remembered John's cowardice, kneeling and begging for forgiveness. I remembered the stew thrown in the trash. The last bit of compassion left in my heart vanished. Goodbye, ex-husband, I whispered to myself as I firmly pressed the left mouse button. Sent. A short, cold notification appeared on the computer screen. The email, loaded with the death sentence for John and Chloe's careers, had been sent. I leaned back in my chair and let out a long sigh of relief. It was over. The arrow had been shot, and no one could stop it. Now, all I had to do was wait for the storm to break over the traitors' heads. That Monday, the atmosphere at John's company must have been as suffocating as the night Chloe came to our home. According to an acquaintance who worked in the same department, my email caused a huge shockwave and spread like wildfire in a matter of minutes. John tried to act normal when he got to work, but inside he must have been consumed by panic. At 10 a.m., the head of human resources called him into a meeting room. There, they presented him with evidence that he had used the company card for personal expenses with Chloe and had falsified receipts for business meals. It was clear-cut embezzlement, and he was suspended without pay pending a full audit. John stood up, his face as pale as wax. He opened his mouth to try to make an excuse, to say it was a misunderstanding, a slander. But the HR director raised a firm hand, cutting him off. On the table, he placed a thick folder containing a printout of the same PDF file I had sent. Faced with such irrefutable evidence, John was speechless. 2 security members approached and asked him to collect his personal belongings and leave the office immediately. Everyone was stunned to see the man who, until then, had been a respected team lead, being escorted out of the company like a criminal. John walked in silence, his head bowed. Amidst the murmurs of the people watching him, that public humiliation would mark his career with an indelible stain. From Sophia's house, I received the news by phone without feeling the slightest emotion. I didn't laugh with satisfaction, nor did I feel pity. It was the price of betrayal. When he trampled on our marriage and pursued his desires, he himself had signed his career's death sentence. 3 days later, his termination was made official. The reason stated in an internal memo was gross violation of professional ethics and damage to the company's image and trust. John not only lost his job but was also blacklisted by HR professionals in the sector. In this city, rumors fly faster than the wind. Once your moral reputation is tarnished, especially by a scandal with a subordinate, the doors to your career close almost completely. The financial consequences were not long in coming. Like a giant wave, John lost his main source of income, but the bank loans were still due on schedule. The car payment, the apartment mortgage, the credit cards, it all became a noose tightening around his neck. Before, thanks to his high salary and my good management, he lived comfortably without looking at prices. Now, just the monthly interest payments made him break out in a cold sweat. My phone wouldn't stop ringing. It was John's number. Seeing the name husband flashing on the screen, I let out a dry laugh and changed his contact name to John Miller. I didn't answer. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then the messages started coming. At first, they were pleas, begging for forgiveness, asking me to withdraw the complaint, to give him a chance to start over. When I didn't respond, the tone changed to accusations, calling me cruel and heartless for ruining his life. I skimmed them and deleted them all. Cruel? When he was in bed with another woman while I waited for him at home with dinner ready, did he ever think of the word cruelty? When he used our shared money to buy expensive gifts for his mistress, did he ever think of my effort? I had only claimed what was fair for me. Even his parents, who lived in a small town, called me. My mother-in-law, crying, insulted me, calling me a bad daughter-in-law who had destroyed her husband and his family. She said it was normal for a man to have an affair, that a woman should endure it to keep the peace in the home. Hearing that, I felt a bitter resignation for the fate of women. I calmly told my mother-in-law that I could not live with a traitor and hung up. I also blocked the numbers of his entire family. I didn't want to hear any more hypocritical moral lessons. John had lost everything, literally everything. Wife, family, career, reputation, and now he was drowning in debt. He would wander around that large but empty apartment, facing the four walls and an overwhelming loneliness. It was the most just punishment for someone who had not valued what he had. Chloe's fate was not much different. As soon as John was suspended, she was also called to human resources. She entered the room with swollen eyes and a haggard appearance, a far cry from the confident, flirtatious image of that night. The decision to terminate her internship contract was immediate. The reason, violation of internal conduct rules and damage to the work environment. Chloe cried, begged for a chance, said she was young and had given in to temptation. But in the ruthless corporate world, such naive excuses are useless. This was a major company. Being fired in disgrace meant the doors to her future had been slammed shut. Worse than losing the job was the contempt of her colleagues. The story of the shameless mistress who challenged the legitimate wife became the hottest topic on the company's anonymous chat forums. When Chloe was packing her things in a cardboard box, no one approached to talk to her or help her. Everyone looked at her with disdain, whispering behind her back. The men who used to hit on her now avoided her like the plague for fear of being tainted by the scandal. Chloe left the office alone, carrying her box. The long, empty hallway seemed like the path of thorns that awaited her. In front of the elevator, she ran into the same security guard who had witnessed her flight days before. The man's look of pity was the last straw, and Chloe finally broke down, sobbing loudly. She ran out of the building, leaving behind the jeers of the people. According to what Sophia told me, after that incident, Chloe couldn't stand the stares and moved out of her apartment. She set all her social media accounts to private and disappeared from the virtual world. It was a very expensive lesson for a young woman just starting to take her first steps in life. She tried to trade her beauty and youth for something vain, but in the end, she lost what is most valuable to a woman, her honor and her self-esteem. I didn't feel sorry for Chloe. She chose that path, ignoring morals and ethics, and the consequences were hers to bear. I only hope that after this painful failure, she learns to live a more proper life. 2 months later, we met again at the courthouse for the divorce settlement hearing. John looked like he had aged 10 years. His beard was unkempt and his clothes were wrinkled. He looked at me with pleading eyes, but I maintained a cold and distant demeanor. Sophia accompanied me as my lawyer. Her professional and sharp presence intimidated John even more. In court, John tried to cling to the idea that he still loved me and wanted to salvage our relationship, but Sophia presented the irrefutable evidence of his infidelity, extinguishing his faint hope in one fell swoop. The division of assets was the point of greatest tension. The luxury co-op was our biggest asset. John, out of pride, wanted to keep it. He didn't want to be out on the street. He proposed paying me my share in monthly installments. I let out a contemptuous laugh and shook my head firmly. I would not allow any financial ties to bind me to my ex-husband. Sophia, on my behalf, presented my conditions. Either he paid me 50% of the apartment's value in a single payment, plus the $40,000 for the renovation that my parents contributed, or we would sell the apartment and split the money. He, of course, had to assume the entirety of the outstanding mortgage. The face of John, unemployed and in debt, turned white. Where was he going to get hundreds of thousands of dollars overnight? The bank had already started sending him foreclosure notices for being 3 months behind on the mortgage. In the end, he had no choice but to agree to sell the apartment. The co-op, once his pride and joy, was put on the market as a bargain for a quick sale. After paying off the mortgage, returning my share and my parents' $40,000, John was left with almost nothing. He signed the divorce papers with a trembling hand. His crooked signature put the final period on 6 years of marriage. He walked out of the courthouse empty-handed, both literally and figuratively. No house, no car, he had already sold it to pay debts, no wife, and no job. He stood alone in the sunny courthouse courtyard, silently watching me leave in a taxi. The price was very high, but it was entirely his own fault. I received the money from the sale of the apartment and the division of assets. It was a considerable sum, enough to start a new life. Instead of a large apartment like the old one, I chose a smaller, cozier place in a quiet, tree-lined neighborhood. I decorated my new home to my own taste. No more ostentatious, flashy furniture to satisfy John's vanity. Instead, I used soft beige tones, fresh plants, and a simple solid wood bookshelf. Every corner of the house reflected my personality and gave me an unusual sense of peace. Tonight, I've invited Sophia over for a housewarming. We are sitting on the balcony with a cool breeze, drinking red wine and looking at the illuminated city. Sophia toasted to my freedom for having escaped that disaster. I smiled and clinked my glass against my valuable friends. Without her strength and determination, I probably wouldn't have weathered this storm with such fortitude. My phone vibrated with a notification. My paycheck had been deposited. I've been promoted to team lead after successfully heading a major project. The intense work has helped me gradually move away from the pain of the past. I opened Facebook and saw a message from a stranger. Her profile picture was a sunflower in full bloom. She was thanking me. It turns out Sophia had shared my story anonymously on a women's forum to alert others, changing all the names and personal details. The woman told me that reading my story had given her the courage to leave her husband, who had been abusing and cheating on her for years. Reading the message, I felt a strange warmth in my heart. My pain hadn't been entirely useless. It had become a motivation and a lesson for other women navigating a sea of suffering. I took a deep breath, enjoying the cool autumn night air. The past was locked behind the courthouse doors. Now, a wide and hopeful sky stretches before me. I am Grace. I am 32 years old. I am single, independent, and happy. I smiled and took a sip of wine. The bitter taste of the wine and the sweet aftertaste it leaves in your throat are like my life. I suppose you have to go through the bitterness to be able to taste the sweetness of freedom. Thank you very much for listening to my story to the end.